They threw her out at midnight, 10 days after giving birth, in 28 degrees, holding two newborns, bleeding through hospital pajamas. They thought they were getting rid of a nobody. What they didn't know was that every single brick of that house belonged to her. The company where their son worked? Hers. The neighborhood they lived in? Hers. Every account they had frozen. Every asset they owned gone. Barbara Mitchell spat in her face and called her trash. 4 years later, Barbara is scrubbing laundry in a federal prison for 12 cents an hour. This is the story of Sarah Blake, a billionaire who spent 4 years pretending to be poor, just to find out if one man could love her for who she really was. He couldn't. And that mistake cost him everything. When they underestimate you, that's not your weakness. That's your greatest weapon. If you've ever been written off by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me what you would have done in her shoes, and subscribe because every week we bring you stories that remind you the people who count you out are usually the ones who can't count.
Let's go back 4 years to where the deception began. Before I was just Sarah, I was Catherine Sarah Blake of Blake Holdings. At 28, I took my late parents' small software company public and became a billionaire overnight. Their business, started in 1995, was a simple tool for landlords. After they died in a plane crash in 2017, I inherited it, drowning in $3 million of debt. Everyone advised me to sell, but it was all I had left of them. I poured everything into it, working 100-hour weeks, teaching myself AI, and reinventing the platform as Blake OS. By 2020, we dominated the market in 43 states. Forbes called me the PropTech Princess. I had achieved unimaginable success, but I felt completely empty. That's because just 6 months before the IPO, I learned a devastating truth about my fiancé, Marcus. He was plotting to marry me, divorce me, and claim half of my fortune. He and his lawyer had spent months creating fake documents to argue he was vital to my company's turnaround. We caught the scheme just 3 days before the wedding. The criminal trial that followed was a media circus, a public nightmare. Tech heiress, targeted by gold digger, was plastered everywhere. After 6 days on the witness stand, he was sentenced to 5 years for fraud. But that experience broke something inside me, my ability to trust anyone. I stopped believing someone could love me for myself, not for my money. Everyone saw me as a walking bank account. So, in 2021, I made a life-altering choice. I moved to Greenville, North Carolina, where no one knew my face. I invented a new identity, Sarah Blake, a freelance copywriter living off a small $100,000 inheritance from my parents. Only my lawyer, David Harrison, and my assistant, Emma Rodriguez, knew the truth, managing my empire while I tried to live an ordinary life. All I wanted was to find out if someone could fall for Sarah the writer, the woman with a used Honda Civic who worried about her power bill. I wanted to be valued as a person, not a financial statement. I met Ryan Mitchell in September of 2021 at a library fundraiser, a place that had always been a refuge for me. He was a volunteer, reading Where the Wild Things Are to a group of 6-year-olds, doing all the monster voices. He was patient and completely present. When we spoke, I told him my cover story. He just said, "That's neat," and told me he was in property management. There was no bragging, no attempt to impress me. He listened. Coffee led to dinner, and slowly I let my guard down. Of course, I had Emma run a complete background check. He was clean, no criminal record, good credit. He worked at a firm that was, ironically, owned by one of my holding companies, buried so deep no one there knew. I watched him for 6 months before we were official. He seemed genuine, always paying for dates on his tight budget, and never pressuring me. I almost told him the truth a dozen times. The slam of the front door echoed through the house, a final, jarring note to a symphony of misery. Barbara Mitchell was gone. My husband, Ryan, stood beside me, his arm wrapped tight around my waist as we watched her car peel away from the curb. The silence she left behind was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of our life being ours again. This moment of peace was hard-won, the culmination of a nightmare that began the day she arrived with suitcases, declaring she was moving in to help with my high-risk pregnancy. Family helps family, she'd said, a phrase she weaponized to justify her invasion. Ryan, caught off guard, hadn't known how to refuse. I, on the other hand, had known exactly what this was, a siege. Her help was a campaign of constant criticism and suspicion, a desperate attempt to break us apart. But she underestimated me. She saw a quiet, work-from-home wife, not the woman who ran a global empire from the second bedroom. And that was her first and final mistake. The foundation for this invasion was laid 2 weeks earlier at what was supposed to be a happy Sunday dinner. After the pot roast was cleared, Ryan, beaming, announced we were expecting twins. The joy in the room evaporated instantly. His mother, Barbara, placed her fork down with a deliberate clink. "Twins?" she asked, her voice devoid of warmth. "How do you plan to afford 2 babies?" She dissected our finances, scoffed at Ryan's salary, and then turned her cold gaze on me. "Will you continue to work?" she sneered. "Or do you expect my son to support you while you stay home and play house?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and vile. She called me a gold digger, insisting I had trapped her son, that this pregnancy was a calculated scheme. Her words were like slaps, each one stinging more than the last. I fled the house in a storm of tears, with Ryan scrambling after me, trying to mend the wounds his mother had just inflicted. He swore she didn't mean it, that she would come around, but I knew she meant every single word. That accusation was so laughably wrong, it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. The truth was, our entire life was subsidized by my secret fortune. Ryan had no idea. He believed we were a normal couple, building a life in a charming 1,500 square foot rental. He didn't know I owned the house and the entire neighborhood through a shell corporation. He thought I was a freelance copywriter, tapping away on marketing materials in my office for hours. In reality, I was conducting video conferences with my executive team, managing a billion-dollar enterprise. For the first year of our marriage, this double life worked beautifully. He was the kind, loving partner I'd always dreamed of. We took small trips to Maine and Charleston, getaways he thought we were putting on credit cards. I let him believe our life was a shared struggle, a climb we were making together. I was so convinced I could keep my 2 worlds separate forever. Then, in March of 2024, 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test, followed by an ultrasound revealing 2 flickering heartbeats, changed everything. Our journey together had started with such simple, honest beauty. When Ryan proposed in June of 2023, it was with a picnic at the Botanical Gardens and his grandmother's ring. It was sweet, heartfelt, and didn't cost a dime, which is exactly why I loved it. I paid for our small wedding that September, telling him it was from years of savings. The $8,000 venue felt like a bargain next to the handbags I secretly bought, but he was none the wiser. Of course, his mother found fault in everything. My dress was too modern, the flowers too lavish, the venue not a church. Her wedding toast was a thinly veiled threat. "Welcome to the family, Sarah. I hope you'll be a good wife. And always remember, that family comes first. The way she said family made it clear she meant hers, not me, but even her negativity couldn't dim the joy of that first year. For a while, I almost forgot it was all built on a meticulously crafted lie. I should have seen the disaster coming from the very first day I met them, on Thanksgiving of 2022. The warning signs were everywhere. Barbara greeted me at the door of their modest, split-level home dressed to the nines, reeking of perfume. "So, you are Sarah," she announced, her eyes doing a full appraisal. Her questions over dinner were an interrogation disguised as small talk. She dismissed my freelance career as not really a career and made a joke about Ryan's paycheck not being enough to support a family. His sister Melissa gave me a fake hug and whispered a backhanded compliment about my cute Target outfit. She then pointed to the $12,000 platinum bracelet I'd bought myself. "Is that real silver?" she asked. I'd quickly learned to downplay my possessions. "No, it's just costume jewelry," I lied, to which she replied, "You have this such wonderful taste for someone on a tight budget." The entire night was a barrage of passive-aggressive jabs. On the drive home that night, Ryan tried to excuse their behavior, saying they were just protective and would warm up to me. They never did. Their suspicion and condescension only grew, fueled by the simple, non-materialistic life I projected. I endured it all, silently, because I was so determined to make this work, to prove that a genuine life was possible. I needed to know that Ryan's love was real, untainted by the knowledge of my wealth. Every time I was tempted to tell him the truth, to end the charade, I would think of Marcus. I'd see the look in his eyes the moment he realized I'd discovered his scheme. The chilling emptiness, the cold calculation, the raw greed. After him, I had to be sure. And so I hid my empire, pretending to be someone else, hoping to find the one thing my billions could never buy. With those words, "My accounts are my own business," the war began, though I didn't know it then. Her eyes went cold as she asked, "What are you trying to hide, Sarah?" I insisted it was about financial independence, but she twisted it, murmuring how most wives trust their husbands. That was the first time I truly defied her. Before that, her invasion was subtle. She opened my mail, claiming she was just helping me stay organized. She pressed for details about my personal bank accounts, insisting Ryan should be listed on everything for emergencies. She and Tom took our master bedroom, saying it was only temporary, moving me into the smallest, coldest guest room because the stairs were supposedly too dangerous. She took over the kitchen completely, making only meals she enjoyed. It started with her rearranging my cabinets. "Your kitchen is so chaotic, dear," she'd said, before tossing out half my groceries because they weren't healthy for the babies. It all began in late April of 2024 when she moved into our spare room, announcing I should not need to ask for permission to help with my own grandchildren. I never did call my friend Emma back. I couldn't. Not with Barbara always there, listening to every word, watching every move. I remember Emma's text after she tried to visit, asking if I was okay, because my mother-in-law was blocking her from seeing me. I had to lie, telling her I was just tired. Barbara had made it her mission to isolate me, turning friends away by saying I needed rest, not social calls. This isolation was how she took control. She answered my phone, telling my clients I couldn't talk. Slowly strangling my freelance business, she policed every bite I took, with comments about too much sugar or too many calories, until I was scared to eat in my own house. By just 17 weeks, her constant remarks about my weight gain and puffy face had pushed me toward an eating disorder. But the worst part was seeing how it changed Ryan. I'd see him watching me with suspicion, a look I'd never seen before. He stopped being affectionate. He moved out of our room, saying I needed my rest, but it was her voice, not his, that I heard in his words. I would hear them at night, whispering in the kitchen, and I knew she was turning him against me. What if those babies are not even his? I heard Melissa say one afternoon, loud enough for me to overhear. That single, venomous question was the culmination of weeks of insidious whispers. Melissa, my sister-in-law, had moved back in with her parents after her divorce and became a constant, poisonous presence in our home, reinforcing her mother's campaign. "I'm just worried about Ryan," she'd say. "Sarah just seems so secretive." Night after night, I'd hear Barbara planting seeds of doubt in Ryan's mind. "She got pregnant so soon after the wedding," she'd murmur. "And she's so secretive. Have you ever stopped to wonder what she might be hiding?" Ryan would defend me at first, insisting I had nothing to hide. But Barbara was relentless. "Then why won't she let you see her bank accounts? What kind of a wife does that?" Eventually, the poison worked. When I finally confronted him, begging him to see that his mother and sister were turning him against me, he just said they were concerned. "Concerned about what?" I pleaded. "I've done nothing wrong." His reply shattered me. "Then why won't you let me look at your bank statements?" I tried to explain it was about privacy, about boundaries, but he couldn't see the difference anymore. He just saw secrets. "Then prove it," he said. "Let me see your bank statements." His words hung in the air, a devastating ultimatum. My refusal, my silence, was all the proof he needed of my guilt. He couldn't understand that if I showed him the life we'd imagined would be over. That moment was the breaking point, the reason his mother felt so emboldened. He had already chosen her side. He said nothing to defend me just days earlier when I confronted him, telling him his mother had hired someone to follow me. He just looked away, uncomfortable, and asked if I'd given her a reason to be suspicious. I hadn't imagined it. I had seen the same car parked across the street too often, felt eyes on me at my doctor's appointments, and even spotted a man with a camera in the grocery store. When I confronted Barbara, she didn't even deny it. "I am protecting my son," she'd said calmly. "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about." All this was happening on July 28th, 2024. I was 24 weeks pregnant with his children, and my doctor had just put me on modified bed rest, warning me that my low placenta put me at risk and that any bleeding meant I had to call immediately. I knew she did it on purpose. As I clung to the railing, my heart pounding, I looked at Melissa and saw no remorse in her cold, calculating eyes. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," she exclaimed with fake concern. "You really have to be more careful on these stairs." She then had the nerve to smirk and call me clumsy. In that terrifying second, as the laundry basket flew from my hands, I saw my life and my baby's lives flash before my eyes. A 15-stair fall stopped only by my grip on the railing. It had started with a sharp, pulling pain in my stomach as I carried the heavy basket up the stairs, a task I knew I shouldn't be doing. Melissa had just been sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, watching me struggle. I only picked it up because Barbara had ordered me to, dismissing my doctor's warnings. "I'm not supposed to lift anything heavy," I had tried to explain. "You're not an invalid," she had cut me off. Ryan wasn't home. Her own husband was out in his workshop. She had scoffed at my bed rest diagnosis earlier that day, saying, "Women in my day worked right up until they went into labor. You are being lazy." I sat quietly in the chair they'd put in the center of the living room, like I was on trial. Barbara's face was glowing with victory as she announced the private investigator had sent his final report. My heart beat slow and steady. She scrolled through images on her phone, pictures of a woman who looked like me in a hotel room with a man I'd never seen, kissing him in bed with him. I asked quietly, "What is this?" With a smirk, Barbara said, "It's proof you've been cheating on my son." I just shook my head. "Those aren't real." Melissa jumped in, showing me her phone with screenshots from dating apps like OkCupid and Tinder, all using my photos. Ryan held a paper showing my phone's location data, which claimed I'd been at hotels. I watched as they built their case against me, just waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth I had quietly collected. Their scheme was incredibly detailed, a cold and calculated web of lies. It all hinged on a man Melissa had found, a tech guy named Connor Briggs, who had been fired from Blake Holdings 2 years prior. He was resentful, needed money, and for $15,000, he was willing to manufacture my social ruin. This was more than just simple photo editing. Connor was an expert. He used sophisticated deepfake technology, taking my real photos from social media and seamlessly placing my face onto another woman's body in intimate photos with a model. He even falsified the metadata to make them appear genuine. But the pictures weren't the only part of the plan. They created an entire fake identity with phony dating profiles and text message exchanges from a burner phone. He even hacked my phone to copy and then alter my real location data. Melissa had spent weeks perfecting my signature for fake receipts, and they even had a supposed witness, a friend of Melissa's, ready to lie. It was an expensive, elaborate plot designed to completely destroy me. I should have run the moment I knew they were planning something. In late August, 32 weeks into my pregnancy, a small recorder in my pocket caught the conversation that confirmed my fears. I was supposed to be resting when I heard Barbara, Melissa, and Tom in the living room. Melissa complained that their investigator had found absolutely nothing. "Maybe she is this clean," she'd said. Barbara's reply was chilling. "Or maybe she's just smart. Ryan needs a reason to doubt her." When Melissa asked what she was suggesting, Barbara said coldly that they would create a reason, and they would protect their son by any means necessary. A wave of sickness hit me. They were going to frame me. I knew I should have grabbed my go bag and disappeared, but at 32 weeks pregnant with twins, I was terrified of going into labor alone, of the custody battles that would surely follow, and of making myself look guilty by running away from a crime I never committed. So, I made the fateful choice to stay. I had learned that I couldn't rely on anyone in that house, not even Tom, the one person I thought might help. Just before my world fell apart, I had pleaded with him for help, and he swore he would talk to Ryan and make things right. But an hour later, Ryan stormed into our room, furious. He accused me of trying to turn his father against his mother, of trying to tear their family apart. It was clear Tom had betrayed me, telling Barbara everything, who then twisted my words to make me the villain. When I saw Tom in the hallway later, he refused to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, explaining that Barbara had threatened to divorce him, take everything, and ensure he never saw his grandchildren if he took my side. "I just couldn't do it," he whispered before walking away. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty that I was on my own. No one was coming to save me. My counteroffensive began on a Sunday morning, while the Mitchells were all at worship. A team of installers came to the house and put cameras and listening devices everywhere. The living room, the kitchen, and all the hallways, cleverly hidden as smoke detectors, photo frames, and even electrical outlets. From that day forward, I recorded every single thing, slowly building my case. I took this drastic step because Barbara, despite my doctor's orders for strict bed rest, still made me clean and cook for the family. One afternoon, Tom found me at 29 weeks pregnant, on my hands and knees, scrubbing a spill Barbara had made on purpose. The pain in my back was excruciating, and I was crying. He knelt down beside me and gently said, "This is not right." He looked me in the eye and promised he would talk to Ryan, that he would make it stop. For a moment, a wave of hope washed over me. I actually thought I had finally found an ally. That whole terrible chapter started with a fall. The contractions began that same night, sharp and terrifying, at only 24 weeks along. Ryan sped me to the hospital, where Dr. Patterson confirmed the baby's heartbeats were strong, but that I was now at risk for preterm labor. The orders were clear: strict bed rest, no stairs, no lifting, and zero stress. Once we were home, I told Ryan that Melissa had bumped into me on purpose. He dismissed it immediately. "You're just being paranoid," he said. Barbara must have been listening, because she flew into the room, screaming that Melissa would never do such a monstrous thing, and that I needed to take responsibility for my own clumsiness. I pleaded with my eyes for Ryan to stand up for me, to be my husband, but he just looked away. Alone in our room that night, I cried until I couldn't breathe. Then I stopped. I took out a secret phone Barbara knew nothing about, and I called my friend. "Emma," I said, my voice shaking but firm, "I need you to install hidden cameras." With the slam of a heavy door and the cold click of a lock, I became a prisoner. Barbara's voice echoed from the other side, explaining it was for my own protection, a twisted justification for trapping me in the damp, moldy basement. They were convinced I was unstable for trying to run, for trying to save my children. Just moments before, they had caught me. My sister-in-law, Melissa, stood in the hallway, holding the escape bag I'd hidden in my car. Ryan and Barbara appeared like ghosts, their church plans a deliberate lie. "You were going to vanish with those babies," Barbara accused. I insisted they were mine, but she just smirked. "We'll see about that." Ryan was already on the phone with their lawyer. They took everything: my keys, my phone, my freedom. Barbara's final words were a death sentence for my hopes. "If those babies aren't Ryan's, you will leave with nothing. No dignity, no children, nothing." That was how, at 35 weeks pregnant, I ended up locked away, powerless to stop them from stealing my future. But why would I try to run away in the first place? It all started with a desperate late-night call to my attorney, David Harrison. I told him I needed out immediately. I asked for a safe house, security, and divorce papers drawn up as fast as humanly possible. He said 48 hours. I demanded 24. That night, I secretly packed a small bag, burying it under the spare tire in my car. My plan was simple. The family went to church every Sunday like clockwork. I would wait for them to leave, then drive straight to Charlotte, where David and my friend Emma would be waiting. I'd have my babies there, safe from this nightmare. All I had to do was survive one more day. Sunday morning arrived. I listened to them getting ready, heard the front door close and the car start. After waiting 10 agonizing minutes to be certain, I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, only to find Melissa standing right there in the hallway. My blood ran cold. "I thought you were at church," I stammered. "I decided to stay home," she said, and in her hand was my hidden bag. And what pushed me to make that frantic call to my lawyer, to risk everything on a desperate escape? It was the moment I realized I had no other way to defend myself. An hour earlier, my world had been shattered. Ryan confronted me, his face a mask of cold fury. He accused me of being at the downtown Marriott 7 times in 4 months. When I insisted those were my doctor's appointments, he threw a stack of hotel receipts on the table. "They're fakes," I pleaded, but his mother Barbara calmly mentioned they had a witness, a hotel employee named Ashley Clark, who swore she'd seen me there with another man. It was a perfectly woven lie, an answer for everything. When I tried to approach Ryan, he recoiled as if I were poison. "Don't touch me," he ordered. I begged him to see the pictures were fabricated, but he refused. His voice was hollow when he said he'd seen everything, the photos, the fake text messages. "The evidence is overwhelming, Sarah." My voice rose to a yell as I accused his mother and sister of framing me, of hiring someone to destroy our marriage. Barbara just told me I sounded insane, blaming it on pregnancy hormones. "I'm not crazy," I shot back. "I'm being framed." But Ryan wouldn't even look at me. He demanded a DNA test after the twins were born, declaring he wanted me nowhere near him until he had proof. "Are they your sons?" he finally asked, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it stopped my breath, because right now, Sarah, I have no idea what is true anymore. He said he didn't know who I was, then turned and walked out of my life. Barbara smiled triumphantly, while Melissa texted and my father-in-law Tom stared at his feet. I was left alone, 8 months pregnant, branded a liar and a cheat. The evidence they had manufactured was flawless, an absolutely perfect deception. And in that moment of complete despair, I understood. I saw their entire plan laid out before me. They were going to let me carry these babies to term, then take them from me and discard me completely. I was utterly and totally helpless against their monstrous lie. So that's how it was. That was the moment my life, as I knew it, ended, and the nightmare truly began. With sirens wailing, 2 paramedics burst through the basement door and froze, their eyes wide with shock. There I was, 37 weeks pregnant, in active labor on the cold concrete floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Oh my God," one of them breathed out. "How long have they kept you down here?" Through a wave of pain, I managed to whisper, "A week," just before another contraction ripped through me, forcing a scream. "Ma'am, we have to get you to the hospital immediately." As they carefully lifted me onto a stretcher and carried me up the stairs, I saw them all standing there, in the living room, the entire Mitchell family. Barbara, Jay, Bean, Melissa, and Ryan, all in their pajamas, looked utterly stunned. Barbara immediately started spinning lies to the police. "She has been having some emotional difficulties," she claimed. "We were only trying to ensure she was safe." The officer's face filled with disgust. "You locked her in the basement?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "While she was in labor," one of the paramedics added, turning a furious gaze on the family. "After we're done at the hospital, we'll be filing a report with Child Protective Services. This is child endangerment." At those words, Ryan's face went completely white. He knew it was over. It had all come down to a desperate, last-ditch effort. Just before 4 in the morning, a thought had surfaced through the haze of pain. An old iPad I'd found in the basement. It had no SIM card, but it could connect to the house Wi-Fi. With my body shaking and contractions hitting every 2 minutes, I crawled to it. I opened a browser and typed 911.gov, finding the feature that lets you text for help. My message was a frantic plea. "I am in labor, 37 weeks pregnant with twins. It is a high-risk pregnancy. I am locked in a basement. They will not let me out. Please send help. The address is 847 Maple Drive, Greenville. Please come quickly." After hitting send, all I could do was pray someone would see it, that help would come. 15 agonizing minutes later, I heard the sirens. The hospital was a lonely sanctuary. My labor stretched for 22 hours. Ryan finally showed up at hour 16, reeking of whiskey. When the nurse called him out on being drunk, he just mumbled something about needing it for his nerves, before looking at me with cold, empty eyes. "As soon as this is finished, we are getting that DNA test done today," he stated. I was in too much agony to fight back. He left and didn't return. At 2:37 in the morning on September 25th, my son Logan was born, followed by Lucas at 2:51. They were perfect. I held them close, whispering, "I am your mama. I promise I will always protect you." The nurse asked if I wanted to call anyone, but my husband had already been there and left. My phone and everything else I owned were still at that house. It was just the three of us against the world. No flowers, no balloons, no celebration. Barbara visited once, glanced at the babies, mentioned they had the Mitchell nose, and reiterated her demand for a DNA test. Melissa sent a text calling my sons bastards. Ryan returned on the third day, sober, but refused to hold his children. "I do not want to form an attachment to children who might not even be mine," he said before leaving. A social worker visited, asking if I was safe at home. I wanted to scream the truth, but fear for my babies made me lie. "Yes, I am safe," I choked out, accepting a card with resources for domestic abuse. That lie led me back to the nightmare. When I was discharged 4 days later, Barbara refused to pick me up, forcing me to take a taxi with my 2 newborn sons, still recovering from a C-section. I arrived at a dark, silent house. Nothing was ready. The cribs were still in their boxes, alone, with my stitches pulling and feeling faint. I spent 3 grueling hours assembling them, weeping the entire time. That first night, with the babies needing to be fed every 90 minutes, was a blur of exhaustion and pain. By morning, the cruelty began in earnest. Barbara stormed in, complaining about the babies crying. She ordered me to clean the kitchen and do laundry. "I just had major abdominal surgery," I protested. "Women in my generation were back on their feet the following day," she scoffed. "Stop being so lazy." That was when I knew. Days later, after Melissa found the breast milk I'd painstakingly pumped and poured it down the sink, with a smirk, it all became crystal clear. This wasn't a family, it was a prison, and that's how it all started. The infection from my C-section had spiraled out of control. My fever hit 103 degrees, and I was shaking so badly I could barely stay conscious. Both babies were wailing. I couldn't remember my last meal, my last drink of water, or the last time I'd slept. My gaze drifted to the natural gas valve on the water heater in the corner. It would be so easy, just 10 seconds to end the horror for all three of us. We could finally be at peace. As my hand moved toward the valve, my son Logan stopped crying. He looked right at me, his wide blue eyes, Ryan's eyes, and made a soft sound. In that instant, something inside me shattered and reformed into solid steel. "No," I whispered. "Mama's not giving up. Mama's going to fight." I used every last ounce of strength to pound on the basement door, screaming for 20 solid minutes. Until Melissa finally opened it, her face a mask of annoyance that quickly turned to fear when she saw the state I was in. "I need a hospital," I gasped. "I think I'm dying." She got Barbara, who called 911, but only to report that her daughter-in-law was being dramatic. That week had been a living hell. On the 5th day, when we ran out of diapers, Ryan claimed he forgot to buy more, forcing me to use old t-shirts. On the 6th day, my C-section stitches were visibly infected, red and leaking fluid. Barbara dismissed my concerns, telling me to stop being so dramatic. By the 7th day, running on less than 45 minutes of sleep at a time, I started hallucinating. I dropped a bottle, and as it shattered, I just stared, unable to process what to do. "Clean that up," Ryan ordered coldly, as he walked in. On the 8th day, they moved us to the basement, complaining the babies crying kept them awake. It all started because they never wanted me to be a mother. A few days after the birth, I spent an hour pumping milk, only for Barbara to deliberately pour it down the sink because it was in her way. When I stared at her, in shock, She just laughed. "I guess you'll have to do it again," she sneered. "Or you could just buy formula with money you don't have." "Is someone hurting you?" the social worker asked, her eyes full of concern. I looked over at my twin babies, sleeping peacefully in the hospital bassinet, and I had to lie. Admitting the truth meant risking foster care, being separated from them. "No," I mumbled. "I just haven't been taking proper care of myself." She didn't believe me, but she had no proof. It was my second time in that emergency room in just 2 weeks. The doctor was furious, telling me the severe infection in my C-section incision had given me sepsis and that I could have died. They put me on IV antibiotics, cleaned the wound, and sent me back to that house, back to the basement, with only 2 days left until they planned to throw me out. Those 2 days were a living hell, but I had no idea that everything was about to change. On October 8th, the 9th day of my son's lives, a tech specialist named Connor Briggs, the man Melissa had hired to dig up dirt on me, delivered his final package. It was supposed to be the evidence that sealed my fate. Instead, it was the key to my freedom. Sunlight pours through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my kitchen. I'm at the stove, flipping pancakes, while my boys babble to each other from their high chairs, in that secret language only twins seem to know. I set my phone down, glancing at a photo on the nightstand of me holding them just after they were born, exhausted but glowing. That victory wasn't about them going to jail or losing everything they owned. My victory is this freedom. My victory is my sons, safe and sound. My victory is that I chose to fight back. I can hear the gentle, rhythmic breathing of Logan and Lucas on the baby monitor. That horrible night on the porch was the worst moment of my life. But it was also the start of my real life. A life without pretending, without hiding, without making myself small for others. They threw me out like trash, and I rose from those ashes. Sleep comes easier now. The nightmares have faded. Tomorrow I will wake up, kiss my sons, make their breakfast, run my empire, help other mothers, and live the life I earned, the life no one can ever take from me. My name is Catherine Sarah Blake. I am a billionaire CEO, a survivor, and above all else, a mother. And I am finally free. The end for them came swiftly. Barbara's tenancy was terminated due to a fraudulent housing application. She was given 72 hours to vacate. When she called the property management company, protesting a mistake, the agent was firm. The building's new owner, Blake Properties, LLC, had found false information. Minutes later, the police arrived with a warrant for embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Tom could only watch in stunned silence as they cuffed her. On Christmas Eve, a judge set bail at $100,000, an impossible sum for him. The next morning, Melissa found an eviction notice on her boutique door. The building was condemned for multiple code violations, found by the new owners, Blake Commercial Properties. Inside, another envelope awaited her, a civil suit for defamation, fraud, and emotional distress. The plaintiff was Catherine Sarah Blake, seeking $2.5 million in damages. Attached were screenshots of the faked videos and bank records showing her payments to a man named Connor Briggs. The whole family stood on the basement stairs, their faces twisted with hate as they stared down at me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew something was terribly wrong. Melissa held her phone out like a dagger. "We know everything, Sarah. We have the final proof." She played the video. It was a deepfake, a version of me doing and saying things I would never dream of with a man I'd never met. "That's not me," I stammered. "It's a fake. It has to be AI. Barbara shrieked at me. "Liar! We have witnesses. We have all the proof we need. You cheated on my son your entire pregnancy." Melissa's trembling finger pointed at my sons. "Those babies aren't even Mitchell's. You brought bastards into this house." Ryan's face was a cold, emotionless mask. I want a DNA test. Now. Ryan, please, you have to listen, I begged. Look at it again. Look closely. It's a deepfake. Someone is framing me. Barbara laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A grand conspiracy against you? Or maybe, just maybe, you're a cheater and a liar. I clutched Logan tighter, instinctively shielding Lucas's bassinet. It's the middle of the night, I pleaded. It's freezing. They're newborn babies. Your newborns. Whatever you think I did, don't punish them. Melissa moved toward the bassinet. Maybe we should keep them, she said. We'll get the DNA test. If they're Mitchell's, they belong here. But she needs to go. A wave of cold terror washed over me. They were going to take my children. No, I whispered, scooping Lucas up, holding both my sons. You won't touch them. Barbara's face contorted with rage. They're bastards you had while you were whoring around. Get them out of this house. She lunged, trying to rip a baby from my arms. I spun away, shielding them, and her hand struck my face. A sharp slap echoed, my ears ringing. Ryan pulled her back, pleading, Mother, don't. But the damage was done. She had hit me while I held my newborn sons. Tom threw the front door open, and a blast of December air rushed in. On the morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve, Ryan's phone shattered the 6 a.m. quiet. His boss was on the line, demanding he come into the office immediately. By 7, he was standing before his manager, whose expression was stone. Ryan, Blake Holdings has acquired Hudson Property Management. An audit of all employees was conducted, and your employment is terminated, effective immediately for a severe violation of our ethics policy. You were recorded ejecting your wife and newborn children into freezing temperatures. Ryan's face went white. His severance would be $0. As security escorted him from the building, he found an envelope on his car's windshield. Inside were divorce papers, a custody filing, and a short, brutal note. The babies are mine. You surrendered your rights as a father. The attached DNA results show a 99.9% probability. Congratulations, you just destroyed your own family. Signed, Sarah. He was sick, right there in his car. At 8 in the morning, as his mother Barbara made breakfast, the doorbell rang. It was a courier with an eviction notice. I want them to be so completely ruined, I had declared just hours earlier, that their family name becomes a synonym for cruelty. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. David, my oldest friend and lawyer, looked at me with concern, suggesting we handle things quietly. I do not want quiet, I replied. I want them to know what it feels like to lose everything. Patricia, my criminal attorney, nodded grimly. We have undeniable proof of child endangerment, assault, forgery, and conspiracy. James, my corporate counsel, confirmed the plan's legality. We can terminate Ryan's job, evict his mother, void his sister's lease, and cancel all of his uncle's contracts. Everything can be done immediately. Angela, my public relations head, saw the bigger picture. With the evidence you have, this story will become global news. I listened to them all. Lay out the path to total destruction. My options clear. After 3 seconds of consideration, I gave the order. Do all of it. I want them to wake up tomorrow to find their entire world has been destroyed. Their world was built on my money, a fact they were blissfully unaware of. I leaned back in my chair in the conference room, the screen behind me displaying their faces. Target 1, Ryan Mitchell, my husband. Target 2, Barbara Mitchell, my mother-in-law, and so on. Marcus, my private investigator, had delivered his report. Ryan was drowning in $28,000 of credit card bills and a $15,000 online gambling problem. Barbara was living rent-free in a house I owned through a charity I funded, all while embezzling $127,000 into an offshore account. Melissa's boutique was $80,000 in debt, operating out of a building I owned. Tom's consulting firm was surviving solely on contracts from my vendors. They are literally surviving on my money, I said aloud. I had walked into that room wearing a $4,000 pearl gray Armani suit, the meek copywriter, Sarah Mitchell, gone forever. I was Catherine Sarah Blake, the chief executive officer of Blake Holdings, and I had come to collect. This transformation began the moment we arrived at the Charlotte Plaza Hotel, 30 minutes outside of Greenville. I owned the hotel, a detail the Mitchells never knew. A full medical team was waiting in the presidential suite David had booked. A pediatrician confirmed Logan and Lucas had cold stress, but would be fine. An obstetrician, however, was horrified by my infected C-section incision. You're severely dehydrated and have lost a dangerous amount of blood, Mrs. Blake. You belong in a hospital. I looked her in the eye. I cannot do that. I have important work to handle first. She saw the resolve in my face and simply nodded. As my best friend Emma tended to the babies, I turned to David. Set up the war room, now. The identity of Sarah, the writer, had died on that cold porch. Catherine Sarah Blake, the billionaire CEO, had returned, and she was demanding retribution. I wanted Ryan, especially, to understand what he had thrown away and to carry that knowledge for the rest of his life. I made that decision while looking back at the house that had just cast us out. A black Range Rover's headlights had sliced through the dark, and from it emerged David and Emma. As Emma, crying, wrapped a thick blanket around me and the babies, David was already on his phone, arranging for emergency pediatric specialists at a secure location. The car's heater blasted as we pulled away, and I saw a curtain twitch in an upstairs window. Someone was watching us leave. It was in that moment, with my sons finally warming in my arms, that I turned to David. My voice was suddenly calm and icy. I want you to destroy them. I want it done completely, legally, and permanently. He met my eyes in the rear-view mirror. Yes, I can. Then do it, I commanded. Spare nothing. Show absolutely no mercy. He asked what to do about Ryan, my husband. I looked down at my perfect, innocent sons, who had just been treated like garbage by their own father. They would never know it all started with a promise I whispered when I thought we were going to die. My baby's cries were piercing. My feet had lost all feeling, and blood was trickling down my legs from a C-section incision, throbbing with agony. As I watched the lights in that house blink out one by one as my supposed family went to sleep, something inside me switched. The despair vanished, replaced by a pure, focused, ice-cold rage. Mama has you, I whispered to my sons. Mama's going to make this right. I promise you, they will pay. Shifting both infants into one arm, I pulled a secret emergency phone from the diaper bag. A phone connected to my real life. I dialed one number. David, it's me. I'm ready. Come and get us. I gave him the address, 847 Maple Drive, and told him they'd thrown us out. We're freezing to death. Please come quickly. After hanging up, I wrapped myself around my sons, shielding them from the cold, and made one last vow. The people who did this to us are going to wish they were never born. Connor's package of lies contained deep fakes and skillfully altered screenshots of my dating app activity during my pregnancy. He fabricated GPS records, putting me at hotels, forged receipts, and other damning materials. The centerpiece of his creation was a deepfake video call. A horrifyingly convincing clip of me in an explicit chat with another man. The technical skill was chilling. That evening, Barbara showed it to Ryan. I was in the basement with my babies, completely unaware, As Ryan watched, his face went from shock to fury to an unnerving calm. "I want her out of this house tonight," he said, his voice flat. Even Barbara seemed surprised. "Tonight?" "Immediately," he repeated. "Her and those children that aren't mine. I want her gone right now, before I do something I regret." Melissa then texted Ashley, the paid witness, who quickly sent a statement swearing she'd seen me at hotels on 6 different occasions. Their case was airtight, a masterpiece of deception. Oh, and Ryan believed it. Or maybe it was just easier to believe I was a cheater than to accept his own family was destroying an innocent woman for their own gain. It was a late spring evening during the golden hour. My penthouse now had a rooftop garden, a sanctuary I'd built right after we moved in. Logan and Lucas were toddling across the grass, chasing bubbles that Emma blew for them. Her daughter Sophie, now 4, was helping them. I sat on a wooden bench, just watching, wearing jeans and a faded Georgetown t-shirt, no makeup, my hair in a messy ponytail. I was at peace. Emma finished with the bubbles and sat beside me. "You okay today?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, it's a good day. Dr. Morrison says I'm making progress. I'm sleeping better. The nightmares are less frequent." "That's good," she said. We watched the kids play. "You know, it's okay to not be okay, right? You don't have to be the strong CEO all the time." I gave her a sad smile. "I'm so tired of people calling me strong. I don't feel strong at all." But my journey to this peace hadn't been easy. After their bath, putting on dinosaur and rocket pajamas, I read my boys Where the Wild Things Are, the same book Ryan read the day we met. We were overwriting the old, painful memories. After they slept, I sat on my bed and opened my phone to the Haven House Foundation's Instagram. I scrolled through photos of women I'd helped, of babies in safe homes. The counter showed we had assisted 2,847 families. My pain had been transformed into purpose, into real power. This power wasn't about money or influence. It was about protecting the vulnerable. That protection could only come after justice was served. And justice had been absolute. In court, text messages between Melissa and a forger were displayed. "Make her look bad," she'd written. The verdict was guilty. 6 years in federal prison and a $25,000 fine. During Ryan's trial, his lawyer tried to argue he'd been manipulated, but the video of him coldly pushing me out the door was undeniable. On the stand, I recounted that night, 10 days postpartum, bleeding from an infection, holding our newborn sons in 28-degree weather. He'd said he didn't know if the babies were his. I looked right at him and said, I felt betrayed, heartbroken, and completely alone. He sobbed. The jury found him guilty of child endangerment, sentencing him to 3 years of probation, mandatory therapy, supervised visitation, and $3,000 a month in child support. The judge told him, "You were too much of a coward to protect your family. I hope you spend every visit remembering what you threw away." The judge's voice was like stone. 12 years in federal prison. Barbara Mitchell's scream echoed in the silent courtroom as the sentence landed, her denial raw and furious. "She's a liar. She deserved it all." But the judge was unmoved. After 23 years on the bench, he called this one of the most horrific cases of family abuse he had ever seen, condemning her for targeting a vulnerable new mother and showing no remorse. The jury had needed just 1 hour. Guilty on all counts: child endangerment, false imprisonment, fraud, and more. This was the moment justice was finally served. It had all started with the overwhelming evidence. During her trial, the jury saw the video of her spitting in my face. They heard audio of her plotting to fake an affair. They listened to experts testify about the infection in my C-section wound, likely caused by her forcing me to work, and the dangerous conditions of the basement where she'd locked me. It was all irrefutable. This public reckoning, however, began just days earlier in a packed press conference room that would soon send shockwaves around the world. I stood at a podium, the camera flashes like lightning, and laid out the facts. What the Mitchell family did not know when they threw me out, I announced, a hush falling over the room, is that they were living in a house that I own. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I continued, my voice steady. They were working for companies that I own. Their entire life was funded by me. I detailed every connection. Ryan's job, his parents' rent-free home provided by a charity I founded, Melissa's boutique housed in a building I owned. Their survival had been a product of my secret kindness. And this, I explained, was how they repaid it, by locking me in a basement and casting me and my newborn sons out into the freezing cold, just 10 days after I'd given birth. That press conference went viral in under 30 minutes. The story was everywhere, with headlines like Billionaire Abuse and Justice for Sarah. The video clips of my ordeal pulled in 200 million views in the first 24 hours. Celebrities from Oprah to Reese Witherspoon tweeted their support. My company's stock soared 12% as investors applauded a CEO who had overcome such adversity. The Mitchells, on the other hand, became social pariahs overnight. Reporters camped outside their home. When Barbara, out on bail, tried to defend herself on Facebook by claiming I was deceiving them, the backlash was merciless. She was testing you, and you failed miserably, one comment read. You threw a new mother and her 10-day-old babies out in 28-degree weather. You are a monster. Ryan couldn't even buy groceries without being confronted by strangers, fleeing a store as people shouted about how he'd treated his own family. Their names became toxic. But this victory was not spontaneous. It was meticulously planned in the desperate hours after my world fell apart. On the night of December 23rd, I was thrown out of my own home, bleeding, holding my 10-day-old twins in the freezing air. Ryan pushed me out the door after his family presented him with fabricated evidence of an affair. They refused to listen to my denials. Barbara spat in my face. As I stood on that porch, holding my screaming babies and pleading not to be discarded, a cold resolve settled over me. This was not an ending. It was a declaration of war. My first call was to my head of security, my second to my legal team. They worked through the holidays, pulling the footage from the hidden cameras I had installed months prior for the baby's safety. They gathered financial records. We prepared every slide, every legal filing, every charge, from child endangerment to fraud. We were going to dismantle their world with the truth. The audience at the press conference, and later the world, watched that truth in horror. They saw Melissa shove me near the stairs and Barbara pour my breast milk down the sink. They saw the family lock me in the basement. They saw everything. But what no one understood until that day was why I had hidden my life from them in the first place. 4 years ago, when I first met a man named Ryan Mitchell, I made a choice. I was tired of being valued for my wealth, so I decided to live a simple life, to see if I could be loved for who I was, not what I owned. I wanted to build a family based on trust and genuine affection, far from the shadow of my fortune. That was how it all began. Model. Before the trials, I had to take back my story. On December 26th, 2 days after Christmas, Blake Holdings announced a press conference. The media went wild. In a hotel suite, wearing a white Armani suit, the color of truth, I prepared. My friend David asked, "Are you certain about this?" There's no going back. I was. I want the entire world to see what they did to me. I walked onto a stage before a crowd of 2,000 journalists. The camera flashes were blinding. I approached the podium. My name is Catherine Sarah Blake. I am the founder and CEO of Blake Holdings, a property technology company valued at $1.8 billion. I am 32 years old. I built this company from the ground up after my parents died 7 years ago. I let that sink in before I told them everything. The morning of that press conference, Tom got 3 calls. His top clients were pulling out. His bank then called, demanding his business loan be paid in full. It had been acquired by Blake Financial Services. Within 3 hours, he'd lost 80% of his income and faced a 6-figure debt. He called Ryan in a panic. "Someone is coming after us." Ryan's voice was hollow. "I know who. It's Sarah." "Your wife? The copywriter? How is that possible?" Ryan said, "I don't think she's a copywriter. I don't think we ever knew who she was." They all met, Tom, Melissa, Ryan, in the same living room where they'd plotted against me. "Somebody named Blake is ruining us," Tom said. Melissa whispered, "Sarah's last name is Blake." The room went silent. Tom asked Ryan if he'd ever actually seen her bank statements, if he'd ever truly known her at all. Melissa searched for Catherine Blake, CEO, on her phone. Articles from Forbes and photos appeared. It was me, but in designer suits, accepting awards. The sun is setting now, casting a golden glow over the rooftop. Tom is bringing the boys back to me. "Thank you for today," he says, his voice quiet. "I will see you next week." Then he departs. Emma is gathering Sophie's things. "Same time next week?" she asks. "Always," I reply. "Love you, boss." I remind her that I am not her boss any longer, that we are friends. "Fine," she grins. "Love you, friend." They share a hug, and then Emma is gone. I am finally alone with my boys. Logan and Lucas are getting sleepy, rubbing their little eyes. "Okay, you two," I say softly. "Let's head inside for a bath." And then it is off to bed. Logan whispers, "Story, Mama?" A wave of love, so fierce it almost hurts, washes over me. "Yes, my sweet boy," I reply. "There is always a story." Then Lucas adds, "Mama, stay?" My eyes begin to water, but they are tears of joy, of healing. Yes, Mama will always stay. Mama is never going to leave you, not for a second. This quiet peace is something I fought for. Just an hour ago, I tensed up when a car pulled into the parking area down below. Old habits are hard to break. It was Tom, carrying a shopping bag. He called up, asking if he was a few minutes early. "No, come on up," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. As he climbed the stairs to our rooftop garden, the boys saw him and ran toward him, shouting, "Pop, Pop!" He knelt down, very carefully and gently, and pulled 2 small toy dump trucks out of the bag. The boys were absolutely thrilled. He sat on the grass with them, playing and making truck noises while they giggled with delight. The whole time, Emma watched him carefully. She does not trust him. She never will. She once told me that being human is stronger than pretending everything is fine. She was right. Sometimes I feel like I am held together with duct tape and stubbornness, but it holds. "Are you sure about him?" Emma had asked quietly while we watched them play. "He testified," I said. "He told the truth. He is trying, and the boys deserve to have at least one grandparent who is not a monster." She pointed out he enabled a monster for 40 years. "I know," I told her, "but he is also the only one who showed any real remorse, the only one who is doing the work to change. That is why I am giving him this supervised, limited chance." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I knew I should not look, but I did. It was from Ryan. "Please, I know I do not deserve it. Let me apologize properly. I am begging you, Sarah." I stared at the message for a long moment. Emma read it over my shoulder. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. "No." Good, she said. He wants forgiveness so he can feel better about himself. That is not my job anymore. Tom is the only one who avoided prison. He now lives in a small apartment with his brother and works a part-time job at Home Depot for $13 an hour. His ex-wife, Barbara, is currently serving the second of her 12 years in a federal prison in West Virginia. She works in the prison's laundry for 12 cents an hour and receives no visitors. Melissa is incarcerated in a different prison, now 2 years into her 6-year sentence in Kentucky. She lost custody of her daughter from a previous marriage and is assigned to work in the prison kitchen. After attempting to take her own life twice, she is now under constant suicide watch. Every week, she writes me letters of apology that I never reply to. They are broken people, forced to live with the choices they made. Tom knows his fate is more than he has any right to expect. While their world was coming apart, I was building a new one. Blake Holdings has since grown to a $2.2 billion valuation. I have been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. The Haven House Foundation now operates in 8 states, and in just 18 months, we have helped 2,847 mothers and their children. I mentor abuse survivors and give talks sharing my story. By contrast, Ryan works at a car wash for $15 an hour and lives in a studio apartment in a bad part of town. He sees his sons once a month during supervised visits, where the boys cry because they do not know who that man is. At every visit, Ryan cries too. He sent me a 12-page letter filled with pleas for my forgiveness. I never wrote back, a constant reminder of everything he threw away. People often ask me if I have regrets about concealing my fortune or marrying Ryan. The honest answer is that I regret none of it. Every single decision I made brought me to this moment. It brought me to them. 18 months ago, they made every effort to break me, and for a time, they succeeded. I was shattered into a million pieces. But this is the one thing they never grasped about: breaking another person. You have no say in how they decide to put themselves back together. I rebuilt my life, stronger and with a clear vision. For anyone listening who finds themselves in a dark place, I see you. 18 months ago, I was in your shoes, standing out in the freezing cold after the man who now begs for my time threw me and our 10-day-old sons out onto a frozen porch. They took everything. I believed I was completely powerless, with absolutely nothing left, but I was mistaken. I still had myself. I still had my will to survive. I still had my profound love for my children. And that was everything. The headlines were devastatingly clear. PropTech princess Catherine Blake takes company public at 28 to billionaire CEO of Blake Holdings, valued at $1.8 billion. Melissa's phone fell from her hands. Ryan grabbed it, staring at the screen, at the wife he had thrown out into the freezing night. It couldn't be real. But every article, every photo confirmed it. They had called me worthless trash, and I was a self-made billionaire. "We are finished," Tom said. Completely finished. Ryan looked at the powerful, confident woman on the screen and realized he had given her every reason to destroy him. And all of it, this entire nightmare for them, had begun on the night of December 23rd, when my husband, believing the lies of his mother and mistress, forced me and our newborn twins out of our home because he was convinced I was just some unimportant woman he could throw away. As I clutched my 10-day-old sons in the freezing 28-degree weather, I stared at my husband one last time. This was the man for whom I had hidden my entire identity. For a fleeting moment, I saw a doubt flicker in his eyes, maybe even regret. But then Barbara whispered in his ear, and his face hardened into stone. He put his hands on my shoulders and shoved me toward the open door. I struggled to keep my footing, my babies wailing from the cold and the fear. "Ryan," I begged one last time as he pushed me again, harder, onto the porch. The wind cut through my thin pajamas. Barbara appeared behind him and spat, the saliva hitting my cheek. "You're trash," she hissed. And trash belongs on the street. The door slammed shut, the locks clicked, and the porch light went out, leaving me bleeding and alone in the dark. I was paralyzed with horror. My baby's skin was already turning a frightening shade of red from the brutal cold. They thought they were destroying a nobody. They had no idea they had just declared war on a billionaire who had given it all up for love. The sound of my boys' laughter fills the kitchen, a pure, unguarded joy. "Mama, happy," Logan says, looking right at me with complete trust. Lucas wraps his sticky pancake fingers around my neck. "Love you, Mama?" Tears of healing sting my eyes. "I love you both more than anything," I whisper, kissing their heads. This moment, this messy, perfect peace is everything. Emma hands me a coffee, smiling. "You actually did it. You survived." "We survived," I correct her, "because I never would have made it without her." "So what's next?" she asks. "You got your justice, rebuilt your life, started a foundation. What's the next mountain?" I just look at my sons, this beautiful life I clawed back from the brink. "No more mountains," I say. "Just this." This peace was hard won. It wasn't sealed with a shout, but with a quiet notification on my phone months ago. A simple message confirming that his assets were frozen, that the life he built on my ruins had finally crumbled. It wasn't a celebration. It was a long, slow exhale I'd been holding in for years. That quiet victory was the end of a war fought in the dark. A war waged after the boys were asleep, fueled by caffeine and sheer will. With Emma as my only ally, I spent countless nights with lawyers, meticulously tracing every dollar he stole, every lie he told. By day, I was a single mom building a new future. By night, I was dismantling his. It all started on a gray afternoon with an official-looking envelope. Inside, a letter explained that my home, my savings, our shared business, everything was gone. He had used it all as collateral, leaving me and our 2 little boys with nothing. That was the day he broke my life. But it was also the day I decided I wouldn't just rebuild. I would reclaim. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story resonated with you, reminded you of your own resilience, or gave you hope in a tough time, please hit that like button and leave a comment with your thoughts. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Your story is important too, and I'd love to read it. If you know someone who needs to hear this message right now, please share this video with them. And if you're not already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. Remember, they can knock you down, but they don't get to decide how you rebuild. You are stronger than you realize. This content was thoughtfully researched, developed, and edited by our team to bring you valuable lessons and inspiration. Every story we produce is designed to empower you to conquer life's challenges and find your own inner strength. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.